What's up, friends? Before we hop into the show, I gotta tell you about some damn good beef. And our friends over at Hassel Cattle Company are providing damn good beef to the entire United States. Hassel Cattle Company is the absolute best source for farm-to-table Wagyu beef in the country. Hassel Cattle Company is a fourth-generation cattle farm out of Texas, and they ship all over the United States straight to your door. They call their beef the blue-collar Wagyu because it's the best damn Wagyu that every man or woman can afford. Hassel Cattle Company offers Wagyu smoked sausage, New York strip, beef bacon, Wagyu Frank, of course, without any fillers, and 2 jerky flavors when the sweet and spicy is absolutely delicious. Their hamburger won Food Network's Northeast Burger Jam, and we love them, and they're giving us a promo that we can't pass up. If you use the promo code DNVR10, you'll get 10% off your order over at Hassel Cattle Company, and if you spend over $200, you'll get free shipping. So make sure to get a lot of damn good beef for yourself and use that promo code DNVR10 over at Hassel Cattle Company. That's HASSELL cattlecompany.com. All right, Mase, let's hop into the show.
Number one for the one and only DNVR. 2 goes out to Zac, Mase, RK at the bar. 3 for Mr. B in that old trophy case. None 4 still waiting for, well, bring on the chase. Out on the field, a mile high, Broncos win is our desire. Coupled with Breck, Brew and a friend, bleed orange and blue to the bitter end. Come and join us, DNVR. We are DNVR.
Welcome into the DNVR Broncos podcast on St. Patrick's Day. I'm your host, Zach Stevens, joined by my man, Andrew Mason. And before we hop into the show, got to tell you about our presenting sponsor, MSU Denver Online. And time again, the one thing that will protect you against economic downturn is an education allowing you to adapt into varying careers. And you can go build your toolbox to be ready for whatever hits us over at MSU Denver Online. So make sure to check them out over at MSU Denver Online. My boy, Mase, top of the morning to you. Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah, where's your green, Zach?
This is the closest I have to green. A little turquoise. I'm saying that turquoise is green today.
You know what? If I were not wearing a USF hat like I am right now, I'd give that a pass because I've got the kind of the teal Super Bowl 50 pullover on right now, but
that's a blue teal. This is a green teal.
Yeah, I found a green hat, man. I think the judge's ruling is going to be on it.
No, it passes. It's funny. I couldn't find a single thing of green besides this. And my girlfriend this morning woke up wearing a green shirt. She accidentally put on a green sweatshirt. She has green sweatpants lying around. I'm like, wow, I certainly am not prepared for this holiday.
Wait, green sweatpants?
Green sweatpants. I mean, and they're not teal. They're very green. She has it all.
Maybe she's making up for your relative lack of green, because I see that and I think Miami Dolphins right there.
Oh,
that looks really aqua on camera.
Can't you say aqua is green?
Okay,
so it's not
aqua.
A no. I'll take it.
It's not green. It's aqua.
I love it. And I hope everyone has some green on today and is joined today. Hey, maybe some people have some green beer. Maybe they got a Breck and put some green dye in it today. And before we go any further, Mason, talk about all the free agent frenzy. See a lot of people tuning in. Really appreciate all of you. And we'd really appreciate if you hopped over and joined us on YouTube, where that's the best quality, and it's also the easiest way to get your comments to show up. So please check out our YouTube page. Hit us with a like. We'd really appreciate that. Subscribe. And if you really want to get crazy, hit those alerts so you are notified every time we go live. And Mase, it's also, of course, the first official day of the new league year. So it's not only St. Patrick's Day, but Happy New Year for the NFL, at least, as the kicks off today at 2 p.m. Mountain Time, Mase, when everything become official. All the Matthew Stafford can finally be a Ram, and Ronald Darby can finally be a Denver Bronco.
Yeah, otherwise known as the day when people working on official team sites can celebrate, because, like, for example, with Matthew Stafford, the Rams can actually refer to him as being their quarterback. And like you mentioned, with Ronald Darby, no longer will Darby be a Bronco, according to reports. When you worked on a team website, this was always the worst time of year until the new league year started, because you had to do all this tap dancing. I remember Joe Flacco a couple of years ago. You couldn't really say much about him. Always had to be according to reports. So
Yeah.
Shout out to all the people working on NFL team sites, because this is a big day for them too. They can actually join the rest of us in talking full throttle about Ronald Darby and other guys that have moved on.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And so we need to talk quarterbacks, of course, Mace, because a lot of quarterback news happened. But really quick, before we do, Mace, news coming down that the Bears may release Kyle Fuller. And one of the things that Vic Fangio told us a couple of weeks ago was that George Paton has prepared for all of the cap casualties that could happen. And Kyle Fuller looks like he could be a cap casualty. You're talking about an all-pro, a Pro Bowl cornerback. Is there any interest there from the Broncos, you think, if he is released today?
If there is an interest, there should be. They should find a way to create their own interest in Kyle Fuller. Look, they still need a cornerback. Now, the guys that they were probably looking at before Fuller potentially came on the market, we're talking about the Desmond King, Kevin King type of guys who'd be on prove-it type of deals, although Chidobe Awuzie got more than a prove-it deal from the Cincinnati Bengals, got a 3-year contract. But this is where you have to have flexibility. And look, George Paton has already shown flexibility, a willingness to say, okay, there are different directions I can go in. I'm going to react to the market. Von Miller being here is a reaction to what happened, because the Broncos were in on Leonard Floyd, pardon me. George Paton, Leonard Floyd, that was bound to happen. Bad mistake there. But they were in on Leonard Floyd on Monday. The price got too high. And when Leonard Floyd's price was ultimately $16 million a year, the Broncos, they weren't particularly close on that, although there was interest there. So after you don't get Leonard Floyd, boom, you say, okay, let's run it back with Von Miller for a year. George Paton calls Von Miller, says, hey, you want to come back? Von says, yep. And boom, the Broncos pick Von Miller up at the terms in which he was scheduled to play all along. So now here's a situation where you could have somebody that Vic Fangio knows well, has seen play exceptionally well in his defense. His All-Pro season in 2018 was with Vic Fangio, of course. So you tweak your plans a little bit, and you have room to do it, even after accounting for the RFA tenders to Tim Patrick and Alexander Johnson. The Broncos are going to be north of $27 million in cap space. They've got so if it may be a cash issue, but it's not going to be a cap issue. If they want to get Kyle Fuller, assuming he hits the market, they can get Kyle Fuller. It might be more than they were originally going to pay for that cornerback spot, but then you can shift things around. Don't forget the cap numbers on Ronald Darby and Shelby Harris, according to Over the Cap, are $4 million for this year. So they've created some room, and they've created a scenario where they know they're going to have some bigger numbers coming in 2022, because both of them spiked to $11 and $13 million under the cap in that year. So why can't you have a similar contract for Kyle Fuller that bumps more of what he's going to make into 22 and 23 when you get that spike in the cap? This is something I think the Broncos can pull off.
Yeah, and it's something that you have to imagine that George Payton will be involved in. But if the price tag goes crazy, especially after already paying Ronald Darby $10 million, even though the cap is only $4 million, you would think that if teams go crazy for him, that's something the Broncos may back off on. And so that's a big name to watch, and Mase, a huge name to watch. The name to watch is Deshaun Watson, and all roads lead to Deshaun Watson, and some huge news coming out this morning from John McClain. Of course, he is the Texans insider. He says the Texans haven't said they're not trading Watson since January. I expect him to be traded. Whoa. And this could be the biggest hurdle that the Broncos initially had in order to get Deshaun Watson, was the Texans finally realizing that, okay, he's going to be gone. And if the Texans have cleared that hurdle, holy cow, Mace, this is huge news.
Now, the question is, where does he expect to be traded to? Because when I talked with John McClain a few weeks ago over on the radio side, he did not expect Deshaun Watson to become a Bronco because he did not feel that the Broncos had enough in terms of assets that teams like the Jets and Dolphins could offer more in terms of tradable assets like draft picks and things like that. And of course, the Dolphins can also throw into a Tagovailoa and give the Texans a quarterback of the future right away, rather than having to go into the draft to do that. If they'd rather have Tua than one of these guys in the draft this year, or I mean, if they really wanted to get frisky and feisty, Zach, the Dolphins could trade for Deshaun Watson, send the Texans Tua, and then the Texans part of the deal could be getting that number 3 overall pick, and then the Texans could take a quarterback then too. Even though I think they'd probably be wise to take Penei Sewell if they got that pick and ride with Tua and Sewell. So that's the one thing that's going to put a wrench in this, and it is the fact that by McClain saying that as well, John McClain, I wouldn't call him a mouthpiece for the Texans organization. I know some people would, but clearly he has an idea of what the Texans are thinking and what they want. And the question then becomes, is what the Texans want something that exceeds what the Broncos can give up? Now, they have the ability to do it. If they're willing to sacrifice enough capital, they can pull this off. And certainly there's no cap issue, because if the Texans trade Deshaun Watson, his cap number is going to be just over $10 million for this year. So even with what the Broncos have spent in free agency, if it were a draft capital only deal, no problem. They can fit Deshaun's contract in this year. And that's also part of the Broncos' planning, is that they wanted to make sure that if the Texans finally picked up the phone and received calls, that the Broncos would be in position to make that deal and take that contract on full stop. And they can.
Yep, they absolutely can. And Mace, one of the things that you said was about how the Texans are approaching this. But Deshaun Watson has a no trade clause. He's really in the driver's seat here. And we hear a little rumor from Michael Lombardi yesterday on the Rich Eisen show. And he says Deshaun controls where he wants to go. The rumor is he doesn't want to play in New York. The rumor is he doesn't want to play in Miami. He wants to play in Denver or San Francisco.
Oh, it's Mike Lombardi. I don't put any validity in almost anything Mike Lombardi says. I mean, he just throws stuff out. He's been wrong time after time, and there's a Bronco connection with Mike Lombardi. He was still on his previous contract, but Mike Shanahan came in and kind of brought him in as a shadow GM and spent the 2007 season basically trying to kind of undermine Ted Sundquist. So if you'll forgive me, Mike Lombardi saying something, that doesn't move my needle one iota.
But if this is true, and he did say it was a rumor, but
yeah, exactly. It's not like he said this is news. It's like he said it was a rumor. I mean, there's, if we went with everything that was a rumor, then we'd have all sorts of crap out there. The way everyone was reacting last night, I just wanted to freaking scream. I'm sorry.
Well, I think it's exciting for Broncos country, and because
it's
he did say
it's crap.
Well, he did say rumor though, Mace. I mean, he CYA right
and
there.
Everyone jumped all over it, which is why people put this stuff. Why people put this stuff out there, because they're going to jump all over the rumor. And it honestly, it's part of what I hate about this time of year. It's why this is my least favorite time of year, because crap like that gets put out there, and we in the media end up reacting to it. And we're just like trained seals, basically. I think we should be better. I think fans should be better than overreact to stuff like this.
But Mace,
that's my soapbox.
What is true about this is that
you're better than overreacting to this, Zach. By the way, I think you're better than this.
Well, no, Mace, because what's true about this, and it's not necessarily what he's saying, it's part of this equation, is that if Deshaun says, I'm not going to Miami, well, then he's not going to Miami. If he says, I'm not going to the Jets, then he's not going to the Jets. However, if Drew Lock says, I don't want to go to New York, the Broncos can ship him off there. It doesn't matter what he has to say or not. So if Deshaun does say that, he can dictate where he goes. And if it does come down to one or two teams, if Deshaun does knock off, half the teams in the league and the Broncos are still on that, well, then that really helps. And that is part of the equation. But Mace, when you break it down, saying what other teams can offer, yeah, the Jets do have a huge advantage on the Broncos having the number 2 overall pick. And the Dolphins do have a huge advantage on the Broncos offering the number 3 overall pick. That's why we've said that if this were to wait until after the draft, the Broncos would have a huge leg up on everyone else, because that playing field will kind of be leveled. But if this is something that happens now in terms of trade compensation, Broncos are going to maybe have to give an extra first-round pick to equate to what the Jets are giving up with the number 2 or number 3 overall pick.
And is George Paton willing to do that? I think that's a fair question. I mean, we also see what came out in terms of what Chicago offered Seattle for Russell Wilson, and Seattle flat declined. Now, I think Seattle was wise to decline. I think that their best play is to try to rebuild things with Russell Wilson. But I mean, this is going to be a substantial package. If you get Deshaun Watson, this is going to hurt. And the question for George Paton is how much future capital am I willing to?
Right. He has to decide how much he's willing to give up there, Mace. And I totally see what you're saying. And one thing that people would caution is saying that George Paton is a draft and develop guy. So why would he want to come in here before his very first draft even and give away 3 first-round picks, give away 3 second-round picks, give away so much when he's a draft and develop guy? And that is a legitimate thing that has to come into this conversation, Mace, is how much would he be willing to give up? Because for me, you and me, it's easy. We give up whatever to get Deshaun Watson because that solves the quarterback issue. George Paton, who really wants to build this team through the draft, as we've kind of seen, he's only made one move through the start of free agency. He really wants to do it through the draft. Would he be willing to give up as much as you and I?
Yeah, and I don't know the answer to that. And only George Paton knows the answer to that. But think about how he's been waiting for this shot. And if you've been waiting a long time, do you go ahead and basically blow up multiple years of high draft picks for one player? Or do you just say, okay, I'm going to find that guy some other way? I mean, that's and we don't know what George Paton is thinking on this. Now, will they be interested? Yes. But everything has a price point where you don't want to go past it. I mean, we see that in free agency. We can see that, like, you go back to Monday, and there was a price point the Broncos did not want to go past for Leonard Floyd. And when it went beyond that, you go to the next plan. And the next plan ended up being, all right, let's bring Von Miller back for a year on the current terms if he's willing to come back. If he doesn't want to test the market, Von was willing to come back, and boom, Von Miller is a Bronco. He says he's going to be a Coloradoan for life. And, we'll see what happens there, because there's a scenario where Vaughn's sentiment could have been entirely different, and it's a reaction to basically how things went. George Paton, to his credit, has plans to go in direction A, direction B, direction C, direction D, and I would say right now direction A should be Deshaun Watson. But does he look at it and say, 3 first-round picks? That's a bridge too far.
Right.
That's where it gets me. Will he go 3 first-round picks and probably some combination of second and third round picks as well? And I get a sense that that third first round pick may be the bridge too far for the Broncos, but we'll see.
Yeah, and of course you can do 4 first-round picks once the draft officially starts. And hey, I'm with all the commenters here. We got the Nagalator saying if we had Watson, our next 3 first-round picks will be in the 20s anyways. You have Mark Anthony saying, what did our Cutler picks get us? Nada. First-round picks are overrated when compared to a young quarterback. And we have so many people in the comment section saying that. And hey, I totally agree with you guys. I'm right there with you, but it's just putting yourself in the mind of George Payton, and where he may value these picks so much and maybe more than us, he may also say, holy cow, did I just get the perfect job? I got to go to an organization that I wanted to go. We get to go out west, closer to California, where my wife's family is from. And now, 3 months on the job, I get the opportunity to get a 25-year-old superstar quarterback.
Yeah, and of course, the other thing for Deshaun Watson, you get that superstar quarterback, but then if you sacrifice picks and you end up having more to spend on the quarterback position, like for example, the team that trades for Deshaun Watson will find out that his cap number for 2022 is $35 million. That's even when taking out the portion of the contract that the Texans would assume, because it's the prorated portion of the signing bonus. So $35 million, and that means you've got a lot to your quarterback, and then you lack the draft capital to get those cost-controlled guys to kind of fill in the gaps. And so that's sort of the thing that lingers over it, is that do you want to sacrifice draft capital and then having to be kind of fill in some pieces? Now, Watson's contract, it's really interesting because there's a roster bonus in 2023. So that roster bonus kicks in, and when it does, it's $37 million. So the numbers are on Deshaun Watson are 35, 37, 32, and 32. And kind of what's interesting about that, Zach, is that means kind of the most unpalatable numbers are out of the chute, whereas the $32 million numbers in 24 and 25 for Watson, that's at a point where you would have the cap space, presumably, to absorb that and then bring in some free agency help a little bit while the cap is going up. So you can, if you really look beyond the horizon, you can see that in 24 and 25, you're able to make up for the loss of draft capital if you have Deshaun Watson. That's why I would do it. I think there's a way you kind of balance things and pull this off. I would make this happen, even if it costs 3 first round picks, and maybe even 4. Although the Broncos would have to deal to get that 4th first round pick. The question is, what do the Texans want, and what does Deshaun Watson want? We have rumors and very little fact, because there's also the rumblings out there that Deshaun Watson just wants out. That he doesn't really care where, he just wants out.
Yep, exactly. And Mase, and question for you guys in the comment section, because I know so many of you wanted the Broncos to keep Von Miller this year and are very happy that $22 million cap hit is staying with the Broncos, because that means Von's back. But here's a huge way to just absorb Deshaun's big cap hit next year. Is this year Deshaun's making $10 million against the cap, Von's making $22 million against cap. That's a total of $32 million. If you move on from Von next year, which would just simply mean not re-signing him because this is the final year of his deal, well, boom, $22 million in cap just freed up. Would take it with the $10 million he made this year. That's 32. And what'd you say his cap hit is next year? 35. So you're only $3 million away right now. So let me know in the comment section, guys. Would you be okay with losing Von after this year, not re-signing him, if it means that you keep Deshaun Watson and you get Deshaun Watson? Now, of course, so factor that into the price of getting Deshaun Watson as well, is maybe losing Von in free agency next year, 3 first-round picks, maybe a Bradley Chubb. I know this would be John Elway's, nightmare, not having any pass rush as well. Yeah. But to me, guys, so easy. He's the quarterback. It is really, really easy.
And you find a way to do it. Right now, Zach, the Broncos, according to Over the Cap, have commitments to $114 million of players for 2022. So if the cap ends up at, say, $202 million, $203 million, they're north of $88 million in cap space. So Then you start saying, okay, well, you got to bring Cortland Sutton back, and Bradley Chubb's on the 5th-year option, and item A, item B, item C. These things start to add up, but it's reasonable it's reasonable for next year to fit that in. I mean, really, the big massive question in 22 would be, what do you do at edge rusher? Because I do think if the Broncos can pull off a trade, in part because their draft capital may not match some other teams that get involved in this, you're potentially talking about Bradley Chubb. And so you got Von Miller in your building. And I think the Texans would rather have Chubb than Miller just because of the youth, but you got Von Miller for another year. Do you try to work out a contract? Do you roll the dice that he's going to have enough left in his tank for 3 years, because that means that maybe the best play to make sure that you're keeping some pass rush punch is Von Miller and Malik Reed working together, or because if you don't have the draft capital, you can't rely on the replacement coming that way. At least someone who can help you immediately. There are things that you can do to make this happen. I mean, again, I would do it, but the question is, how much does George Payton value the draft picks? And the other, and of course, if he makes the trade for Deshaun Watson, I mean, that means his time as GM is defined by Deshaun Watson. It's defined not by a guy he drafted, but a guy he traded for.
Yeah.
And what does he want with that? I would hope that he would understand, and I think he does. He knows that a quarterback is it. It's the alpha, it's the omega, it's the big cheese. But I would hope he'd say, look, Deshaun Watson, top 5 quarterback. Those guys, no one like this has ever become available at this point in his career. Nobody. Right. And do you roll the dice and make the commitment? And someone asked me on Twitter, Zach, recently, I wouldn't do that because the Cowboys, made that deal for Herschel Walker back in 1989 with the Vikings, and the Vikings gave up a ton in draft and player capital, and it made the Cowboys, and the Vikings never recovered for that. Well, the problem was, even in that age, when running backs were perceived to have a greater value than they do today,
right?
It was still a running back. It was not a quarterback. It was not somebody who could have as profound an impact. Herschel Walker, in the end, had little impact. Now, if they'd given up that trade value for Troy Aikman, the entire 1990s in NFL history might have been different. That would have been something worth thinking about, but not for Herschel Walker. So it's a quarterback. It's a different mindset, different impact from the position. So don't look at that trade, which I know a lot of people do look at, and say, well, that's why you shouldn't trade for Deshaun Watson, because it is apples to oranges.
Yeah, it's completely different. And May, speaking of Von Miller and value, we also just found out that Von Miller's value around the league could be a lot higher than people initially thought. Broncos wanted him to take a pay cut. He said no way. And Broncos didn't force him to take a pay cut because they would have had to release him if that was the case. And then on Monday, we found out just how valuable, even in this COVID free agency, how valuable pass rushers are, with guys like Leonard Floyd getting $16 million. So many other guys getting around that $16 million ballpark as well. So maybe Von could get some value in a trade as well. If you throw him in, maybe that, and he wouldn't be a throw-in, maybe that could count as a late first-round pick in the Texans' mind, a second-round pick, something like that. He's obviously not one of the more valuable guys that you'd be trading, because I think Bradley Chubb would have way more value with his age and his contract right now. But maybe that's something that you could keep Bradley Chubb, throw in Von Miller, and obviously a lot more as well. And we have someone in the comment section, Fake Bing, saying Watson's going to go to San Francisco. And when we think about pass rushers, San Francisco probably has the most valuable player that they could put in a trade, not just between the Broncos and San Francisco, but every team. And that's Joey Bosa. That he would be a huge prize for the Texans to get.
Yeah. Nick Bosa.
Oh, I'm sorry, Nick Bosa.
Oh no,
yes.
Yeah, no worries. And of course, he was part of that 2019 draft. So you still have 2 years of cost control on Nick Bosa before you even get to the 5th-year option. And yeah, the 49ers would probably trade Nick Bosa. It's not like the Niners would lack pass rushers either, because they still have D Ford and they still have Eric Armstead. in the building. And it's one reason why they could maybe afford to trade Nick Bosa, as audacious as that might sound. And if you're the Texans, if you're smart, and it's a chaotically run organization, but Nick Caserio is a reasonably smart football guy, and Nick Caserio would certainly ask for Nick Bosa in a trade, in addition to draft capital, and also probably would ask for Jimmy Garoppolo as well. And I'm sure the 49ers would say no problem to that. But that's another thing kind of lingering in this is what the Texans get back in terms of what they can do at the quarterback position this year. Now they have Tyrod Taylor. That Tyrod Taylor can get them through a year.
Yeah.
But are they looking at the various offers and thinking, well, if we can get a deal done with the Jets, we can get the number 2 overall pick, and maybe even Sam maybe even Sam Darnold as well. If we deal with the Dolphins, we'd get Tua. If we deal with the Broncos, it would be Drew Lock and then the number 9 pick. No guarantee you're going to be able to get the quarterback you want at 9. And then the 49ers, you could get Jimmy Garoppolo, who is maligned, and I get that, but he still has taken a team to a Super Bowl. Although in the playoffs that year they rode the running game. But there's a clear difference in the 49ers and how they've done the last few years, not only in terms of wins, but in overall offensive efficiency with Jimmy Garoppolo compared to when they've had to put their backups in there. So there is a positive impact to Jimmy Garoppolo.
And I think, well, Mase, I think with the situation that the Texans have built, signing Tyrod Taylor for a decent amount of money, what is it, $6 million guaranteed, and he can get up to $12 million, I think, is the contract down there. That's enough to be a guy to get you through a season, like you're saying. But I also think that could make Drew Lock just a little more valuable in a trade to the Texans, because the Drew Lock, he still has a chance to be very good. Now, the percentage might not be there, but he could be their 1-year development quarterback and go down to Houston, and they could try to create him to be a very good player and take that shot on him. And they may value that as, second, third round type of pick in a trade for him. And then if it doesn't work out with Drew, they have Tyrod to get you through the year. And then they have so much draft capital in order to get their guy next year. But that may make Drew just a little more valuable.
It may. And, how much do they believe in Drew Lock, and how great an asset is he? Because if there was a deal, Drew Lock would certainly be included in it. He would be redundant to the Broncos. I mean, I can't. Right. You could imagine it with the Matthew Stafford trade and the Broncos insisting on hanging on to Drew Lock and having him develop behind Stafford because of the contract situation with both of them, and the age of Matthew Stafford, but not. There's no way he's off the table if you're talking with the Houston Texans, because ideally you're solving your quarterback position for at least a decade. If you bring in Deshaun Watson and things work out and you get him re-signed when his contract expires in a few years. So what do the Texans think of Drew Lock? And that's something that, I'd love to be able to say I have particular insight on, but I don't. We don't know what Houston thinks of Drew Lock, because you look at their brain trust right now, and their brain trust was not there when Drew Lock sliced and diced them up in December of 2019. At least in terms of Nick Caserio and David Culley, the head coach. Now, Jack Easterby was in the building. Maybe he thinks Drew Lock is the way to truth and the light, and it's like, go get this guy. Make sure he's in any deal. I view Drew Lock like a first-round pick. I certainly hope that somebody in the Texans feels that way, because the more they value Drew Lock in a deal, if you pull it off with Deshaun Watson, maybe that means you're giving a little less in terms of draft capital or other player capital.
Right.
So you hope they think highly of Drew Lock. You hope that they value him like a first round pick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely do. And that would be huge. And just the fact that they have a vet there now could make Drew Lock as a developmental guy sell a little bit better. Man, Mase, I could talk Deshaun Watson all day long, and heck, maybe we'll be talking about him all day long if he becomes a Bronco soon. And it's going to be interesting. Does this thing happen this week, or is it something that the Texans just continue to carry out? But this gives me hope. The John McClain report gives me hope that it will happen sometime before the draft.
Yeah, ample hope there. It's a question of, is it going to happen with the Broncos? Does Deshaun Watson insist on a specific team, and does he say no? I mean, the no trade clause is there, but does he just want out that badly? And what kind of hand does Deshaun Watson want to play? Certainly, if the rumblings about what spurred that lawsuit last night are true, of course, Tony Busby, a lawyer, former mayoral candidate in the city of Houston, posts on Instagram that he's the legal representative on a lawsuit filed against Deshaun Watson. First of all, why are you posting this on Instagram?
Very weird.
Yeah, that does not mesh with anything legally to say I'm going to file a lawsuit. Second of all, we learned that Tony Busby was the neighbor of Bob McNair, the late Houston Texans owner. He's a diehard Texan fan. Third, Busby is someone who has been a little bit all over the place. I don't mean to bring politics into this, but this is a guy who in a 2-month span of 2016 went from saying he was completely done with Donald Trump leading up to the presidential election after the Access Hollywood tape to saying, I'm donating $500,000 to his inaugural fund. So it's like, okay, I mean, you just did a 180 in literally 2 months here that involved $500,000. So, but I would take what this guy puts out there with a grain of salt. And the thing is, the Texans have been so nuts in how they've gone about things for the last year plus that such thought ends up gaining traction because you think, oh my gosh, the stupid things that they've done, they really would do something ridiculous like be behind something like this. It's not something that you can completely dismiss because of what the Texans pattern has been over the last year plus. And so, I mean, sometimes, and this is to the Broncos' benefit, perhaps, you may have to recommend that you could be dealing with some functionally crazy people here. And of course, if for those older Bronco fans who remember 1983 with John Elway, one of the things that helped was that Edgar Kaiser, the Broncos owner, was dealing with a functionally nutty owner in Robert Irsay in Baltimore and was able to exact terms that were far less than, for example, the Colts GM at the time, Maria Corsi, wanted. So maybe that is in play as well, that you're dealing with people who aren't necessarily acting in rational ways and aren't acting in their own best interests.
Yeah, you'd certainly hope so. That would certainly help. And Larry A says, you guys are losing it. And I'd say, Larry, it's fun to when there's hope, it's fun to ride with it.
I already lost it with the Mike Lombardi thing. I'm sorry, but that guy
I knew you would lose it.
That guy just gets under my skin.
Yes, we can tell.
I'm really sorry about that, but that dude just gets under my skin. And last night I was sitting there and it was all I could do to just not jump on everybody on social media the way they're reacting. It's like, well, come on. You're giving this guy credence.
Okay, calm down.
This guy.
And Mitch, you talk about how the Texans haven't been making very many good moves. One of the good moves, I think, is a good move was signing Tyrod Taylor. And of course, that takes one option away from the Broncos. He was a guy that we talked about a decent amount because he's a guy that Vic would like, doesn't turn the ball over, a steady veteran. And you saw a couple of more of those guys go off the board yesterday. You had Kobe Brissett go to the Dolphins, kind of the exact same thing, maybe a little more upside potentially there. And then you have Andy Dalton going to the Bears, and boy, I know people in Chicago are just they are in the worst spot ever right now, going from Trubisky and Foles to now Andy Dalton. It seemed when they were maybe on the cusp of getting Russell Wilson as well. So those aren't exciting names off the board by any means, but those all happened yesterday. So available quarterbacks, if the Broncos aren't able to get Deshaun Watson, or they decide to make a move on a quarterback before they trade for Deshaun Watson, let's say the Texans hold out for a while, it looks like there's Mitchell Trubisky and Alex Smith on the free agent market. Those are kind of the two biggest names right now. And then potential trade quarterbacks, Gardner Minshew, Nick Foles, who has been connected with the Broncos a little bit, and Sam Darnold.
Yeah, and the interesting thing here is if I'm in Broncos country, and yeah, this is kind of a consolation prize if you don't get Deshaun Watson. Think in terms of the guys that are in the trade market. Alex Smith, I think there's a league-wide expectation that he's going to end up in Jacksonville with his college coach, Urban Meyer. And that would definitely free up Gardner Minshew. One of the things that kicks in, we see these contracts for the quarterback signed. Andy Dalton's number is $10 million.
Whew.
Ryan Fitzpatrick, his average annual per year, his per year deal is, obviously it's 1 year. It's $10 million. Well, the team that trades for Nick Foles would get him for $4 million.
Yeah.
If a team trades for Sam Darnold, because the Jets assume the prorated portion of what's left of the signing bonus, it's going to be just under $4.8 million. Gardner Minshew is the biggest steal of all at $850,000 for the 2021 season. And so the Broncos, I think if they get a quarterback from that pool, it's going to be via trade, because they are thinking not only in terms of cost control for the cash budget, they're thinking, do we want to have potential 8 figures, $10 million going to a guy who might not end up starting because Drew Lock beats him out in competition? So I would be thinking, and I'd be thinking very strongly in terms of Foles, Darnold, Minshew. And the thing that's interesting, Zach, is look at all the quarterbacks going off the board. Dalton goes to the Bears, and then Fitzpatrick goes to Washington, and Miami nabs Brissett, and Taylor goes to Houston. So really, you've thinned the field a little bit. I mean, there's rumblings that there were some reports a couple of days ago that San Francisco was interested in Mitchell Trubisky. So if San Francisco gets Trubisky,
that'd be great.
It'd be great, because you know what? Then that would narrow the field basically to Pittsburgh, New England, even though they did bring in Cam. That's a very budget-friendly contract because it's incentive-laden. And Denver for a Gardner Minshew, for a Sam Darnold. So you actually get into an advantageous spot where maybe you're only bidding against 1 or 2 other teams to get somebody who, if it's Dalton or Minshew, could provide competition. And also, if that guy beats out Drew Lock, has some upside, can be the future.
Yeah, and that's what I like about Gardner is the upside there. And I know a lot of people are worried about Trubisky, especially with the price tag. $15 million is what he could command. And he, like you said, Mase, he really seems like the only legitimate option because of Alex Smith going to the Jags potentially. He seems like the only legitimate option in free agency that would be out there. And I know a lot of people are getting nervous. So, Mase, of the remaining 5 guys, and we're going to put Deshaun Watson to the side since we already gave him 40 minutes of this show, because of course,
and he's also
that's our number one.
He's plan A. Okay. Right. If we're doing this, if you're George Payton, this is how you should be thinking. Deshaun Watson's plan A. But the thing that I like about George Payton is, as we saw with the Floyd Von Miller situation, George has got plan B, plan C, plan D. He's got a bet. And so plan A is Deshaun Watson. Plan B among those quarterbacks, Zach, who would you say should be plan B?
Well, and that's what I want to do right now. I want to rank the remaining 5 options. We have Sam Darnold, Nick Foles, Gardner Minshew, Alex Smith, and Mitchell Trubisky. And one of the things that you do have to take into this is that Mitchell Trubisky and Alex Smith will be getting free agent money. Gardner Minshew, Nick Foles, and Sam Darnold will be getting the contracts they're on, but you will have to trade to get them. So how are you ranking these 5 guys? Okay.
You want to start with 5 or you want to start with 1?
Let's start. Let's start with 5.
All right, we're gonna do this Casey Kasem style. We're gonna count them down. Option number 5 for me on this list is Nick Foles.
Me too. Yes, and that's the one that I'm the most nervous about, man.
I am too, because this is something I could see the Broncos doing, is bringing in Nick Foles, because the Bears could have rendered him redundant by bringing in Andy Dalton. I mean, they could have a Foles Andy Dalton competition. I mean, hey, that'd be better than the Trevor Siemian Paxton Lynch decision / competition of 2017. But the thing with Foles is that he's not somebody you want to have to put in there until December. I mean, we know for whatever reason, Nick Foles is great in December and January, but up until then, just a struggle. So for him.
Yeah.
And also Nick Foles, it's limited. If you have to put him out there, he's a bridge, and you have to go get a quarterback. He is nothing more than a bridge at this stage. Now, and the reason why Nick Foles is legitimately in the conversation for the Broncos is Pat Shurmur. Pat Shurmur was in Philadelphia on Chip Kelly's staff when Nick Foles had exploded out of the gates with that marvelous 2013 season. But then the bloom came off the rose pretty quickly for Nick Foles. And part of that was because everybody figured out what Chip Kelly was doing. So while you understand why Pat Shurmur could have really fond feelings about Nick Foles as a quarterback, it's a long time in the past.
Yeah,
it's nearly a decade in the past.
Yeah, not a fan of that move. So that's easily both our number 5s, Mase. What's your number 4?
Number 4 for me is Alex Smith.
Okay, why?
It's just, I don't know that there's a lot in the tank right now, even though over the course of his career, he's been very efficient, especially once he got out of those first few years where he developed. And I think he could be a great mentor for Drew Lock. But again, kind of like Nick Foles, there's no long-term possibility there. You bring him in, he's a bridge, and that's it. Now, that being said, I think in terms of the likelihood of these possibilities, I would rank Alex Smith number 5, because I think it would shock everybody if he does not reunite with Urban Meyer in Jacksonville.
Yep, and I'm with you, Mase. Alex Smith, I do like him as a quarterback, just doesn't really make sense for the Broncos, so I'm putting him at 4 as well. Let's see if we just have the same list, Mase. Who's 3? Who makes it in your top 3?
Okay, my number.
So to reset,
number 3,
you have Mitchell Trubisky, Gardner Minshew, and Sam Darnold.
Well done. I have on my list Sam Darnold, number 3.
Okay.
But I would say he is not number 3 on the Broncos list. I would say he's a little bit higher than that. Again, I expect that if they don't get Deshaun Watson, the Broncos will have one of Nick Foles, Sam Darnold, and Gardner Minshew. The reason why Darnold is low is because he probably will cost you a day 2 pick or the equivalent thereof. Now, there were reports yesterday that the Jets wanted 2 for Sam Darnold and found the market lacking. So maybe they're dialing that back to 1-2. But the other thing that was thrown out there yesterday and dismissed was the notion that Tim Patrick would be involved in a deal. And of course, that was dismissed. I think the Broncos would have, if they made a deal for Sam Darnold, would like to have Tim Patrick just because they're so stacked at wide receiver. But does Tim Patrick really add anything to the trade beyond kind of being a throw-in compared to a 2nd-round pick or a 3rd-round pick? Because maybe it's not 2 2s, maybe it's a 2 and a 3. Are you willing to sacrifice a 2 and a 3 for Sam Darnold? Probably not.
Yeah, Mase, he's my number 3 as well. And I mean, I just can't imagine what the outside world would be thinking if the Broncos had a quarterback competition this training camp with Drew Lock and Sam Darnold. And just statistically, you look at their numbers last year and they're, 2 of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL. I think people would just be laughing at the Broncos. And Sam Darnold's talent is there, but I think the best place for him, Mase, could be like Pittsburgh. Go there, sit a year behind Ben Roethlisberger, and he'll be ahead of Haskins there in Pittsburgh. That'll be easy. But that's the type of place that he needs, not Denver right now.
I would agree with that. But the interesting thing with Darnold is that he's going into his contract year. So, I mean, it's funny to look at a scenario where a team could bring him in, give him kind of a year of football rehab, and then might have to fight to keep him.
Yeah,
exactly. This year. Because the other thing is, if you're bringing him in just for competition or as a backup, I don't think you're taking the 5th-year option on Sam Darnold, which, by the way, you would have to decide on right there at the start of May of this year.
Yes, you would.
If you trade for him, you assume the choice of having that 5th-year option.
Right.
And I can't imagine a team that would only bring him in to be competition or to develop and maybe not getting him on the field this year saying, yeah, we're going to immediately pick that up. That would be interesting.
Yep, I totally agree. Now, Mase, your number 2, I guess I can guess. because I think it's the same as mine.
Yeah, this is boring, isn't it? Because we're both going to say Mitchell Trubisky, aren't we?
Yes, we are. But what I'm going to say, that there is a huge gap in between number 1 and number 2. Mitchell Trubisky, he's better than you think, but
yes, he is.
I don't think he's the answer. And, Chicago people would be laughing at the next team that gets Mitchell Trubisky, and that's obviously a scary thing. And I guess whatever team gets Mitchell Trubisky can laugh right back at them for getting Andy Dalton as their guy. But for me, there is a huge gap between 1 and 2.
Yeah, and the thing with Trubisky, you're right. You hit the nail right on the head when you said better than you think, because the perception is that Mitchell Trubisky is awful. Right. Mitchell Trubisky is average.
Mm-hmm.
He is an average starter. If you really kind of dive into what he did over the last few years, he's firmly in that middle tier. Where you get in trouble is in paying elite money for an average guy. Well, you wouldn't be paying elite money for Mitchell Trubisky. You'd be paying $10 million a year. But then, and it factors in with number 1, if you assume that Trubisky and Gardner Minshew are both mid-tier right now, one has a different price point than the other, and one had a considerably worse supporting cast around him than the other. And that's number 1 pick, Gardner Minshew, who has been decent, is efficient, is accurate, and did it with a support system and supporting cast in Jacksonville that was awful. I mean, the thing with Minshew, Zach, is that people say, oh, Sam Darnold didn't have anything around him in New York. Gardner Minshew didn't have much around him in Jacksonville either.
Right. And 37 touchdowns, 11 interception is what Gardner Minshew has. And just to recap, these are our top 5 of the quarterbacks remaining, not named Deshaun Watson, that we think could legitimately become available, whether it's in free agency or trade. Mase, I love doing that with you. It just shows where we are right now. You jotting down a note? You creating a little graphic for us right now?
Yeah, my rudimentary graphics here. Trying to show what the difference between where, like, up here is Deshaun Watson, and then you go way down here, and that's where, and then you get to Minshew and Trubisky closer together, and somewhere in this middle, Zach, I've got to get my weather forecasting ability to kind of get my pointer, my pencil in the right spot. Somewhere in there, in the middle, is where you're talking about a first round quarterback.
Absolutely,
and that's the whole thing of. If George Payton falls in love and has a conviction on one of these quarterbacks, if you can't get Deshaun Watson, then go get that guy. If you believe George Payton, if you believe in Trey Lance, do what it takes to get him, because you don't expect to be picking 9th. You may have to move up, but you're going to be in a more advantageous position to move up now than you would be in the future. If you have a conviction on Zach Wilson, if you have a conviction on Justin Fields, if you have a conviction on Zach's guy, Mac Jones, do it. Make that happen. Mac Jones actually came up in a discussion yesterday, Zach, and I always like to talk about Mac Jones with you because of this. If the Patriots call you and you're sitting at 9 and they call you about moving up to 9 and they're willing to give a first round pick to do it, but clearly they want Mac Jones, and Bill Belichick, who probably knows as much about Mac Jones as Nick Saban, probably because he asked Nick Saban, is doing that. Do you step back and say, whoa, if Bill Belichick wants Mac Jones, maybe I need to rethink this?
Yeah, absolutely. Because Mase, before I even get that call, you know me, I love Mac Jones. So yeah, I'm probably taking it. And then you get that, then you feel great about picking him at 9. You say, no, thanks, Bill, but thanks for giving me the final vote on who I'm going to take right now.
So do you think this is fair to say, okay, Deshaun Watson's all the way up here, Minshew and Trubisky and the others are down here, and that you'd put first round pick in the middle?
Without a doubt. First round pick is certainly higher for me than all of these options.
Yeah, if you're, if you are going to bring in a quarterback, but that's how I you do the opposite of what the Chargers did when they had Drew Brees in their building and they picked Phillip Rivers, and Drew responded to Rivers being there by becoming Drew Brees, the guy who's going to the Hall of Fame.
Yep.
And the Chargers said we're gonna ride with Rivers when free agency came up. Of course, the labrum injury for Drew Brees kind of exacerbated that decision. But if Drew Lock is healthy, maybe for the Broncos, and you have that sort of situation after a year or two, you make a different decision and say, we're sticking with the incumbent. We can get a first-round pick back for this young guy. Let's go ahead and do it.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. You're not in a bad place if you have two good quarterbacks. That is for sure. And Mase, what a great conversation. We went extra long on this one. And before we get out of here, guys, got to get our DraftKings pick of the week in. Mase, I'm going to basketball for the first time in 2021 for my pick of the week. And of course, got to talk about March Madness coming up, starting on Friday. I guess technically play-in game starting tomorrow night, but I'm not going with the play-in team, Mase. I'm going with one of the best teams in the country for my pick of the week. I'm going with Alabama. You heard me. Alabama basketball to make the Elite Eight at plus 150. Mase, they're a 2 seed right now. They have one of the best offenses in the entire country, and all they have to do is be one of the final 8 teams. By the seeding, it would tell you that they're going to be that, and you get plus money if you take them to make the Elite Eight over at DraftKings Sportsbook, plus 150. Give me Alabama to turn into a little bit of a basketball school in March right now.
Yeah, you know what? I love Alabama going into this tournament, and
love it.
I'm going a step farther.
Oof.
I'm going they're 4-1 to make the Final Four.
Mm-hmm.
I'm taking that.
Let's go.
Look, even though it means they'll be they've got CU in their bracket, so you're not picking CU. I know RK might be disappointed in us saying that. I love this bracket for Alabama. Actually, the funny, the game I'm concerned most about for them in this bracket is if they face Texas in the Sweet 16. That's the one that I get a little bit nervous about. But I like them to pretty comfortably come out of their pod the first weekend. They've got Iona College, the old, Jim Valvano would say, Jim Valvano, Iona College. And the person would say, well, you look awfully young to own your own college. Can't go wrong citing Jim Valvano at this time of year. And then you get Texas in the Sweet 16 if seeding holds, although there's a possibility Michigan State could make a run. They're sitting there in that play-in game. They'd be in that pod as well. And then on the other side, I think Florida State comes out of the other side of the bracket there in the East region with Michigan as the number 1. So then you got Florida State, Alabama, and Florida State is long, talented, deep. It's a great collection of athletes that Leonard Hamilton always has. But Alabama is a more refined team than Florida State. We saw FSU against Georgia Tech last Saturday kind of show their downside. They'll have a hiccup at some point. I think they get to the Elite Eight, but they go against a very well-schooled, well-drilled Alabama Crimson Tide team. Not unlike Nick Saban's football teams. It's a very much on brand for the Crimson Tide to be very well-schooled and disciplined. Alabama in the Final Four. I'm taking that at 4-1.
Oh, I love it, Mase. I love it. I almost went with that one, but I went with the safe play, and you still get plus 150 over at DraftKings Sportsbook. I cannot wait for this tournament. And guys, speaking of
but the Nagalator doesn't like our picks.
No. The Nagalator.
I love Alabama basketball, but they'll lose before the Elite Eight. Get too lazy. You know what? I don't know. I have a lot of confidence also in Nate Oates, their head coach, to keep them on the straight and narrow for this tournament. And Alabama basketball has a chance to do something that the Crimson Tide has never done. And this has been over the last 40 years or so, more often than not, a good program that has fallen a bit short of what they could have done in March. You could argue that Alabama might be the best program in college basketball that has never made a Final Four. I think that changes this year, Zach.
Let's go, Mase. Music to my ears. Love you, Nagalator, but I very, very hope that you are wrong there. And speaking of the tournament and speaking of DraftKings Sportsbook, there's no better place to get in on all of the action than over at our friends at DraftKings Sportsbook, America's top-rated sportsbook app. And guys, not only are they giving you plus 150 odds on Alabama to make the Elite and plus 400 odds to make the Final Four, they're giving you an opportunity to bet on an underdog, $4 on an underdog. And if that underdog wins, you'll win $256. It's that simple. You can turn $4 into $256 over at DraftKings Sportsbook. Check out their app. You can pick a few select underdogs, and if that team wins, you'll win $256 over at DraftKings Sportsbook. You can also get in on NBA. You can get in on hockey. They have great odds boosts every single night over there at DraftKings Sportsbook. So head to the App Store now, download the top-rated DraftKings Sportsbook app now, and use promo code DNVR when you sign up to turn $4 into $256 if the underdog of your choosing pulls off the upset. That's code DNVR to turn $4 into $256 for a limited time only at DraftKings Sportsbook. Must be 21 or older, Colorado only. New customers only. Restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for details. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-522-4700. And man,
wow.
Thank you, Mase. Thank you. And man, I give you an applause, Mase. What a fun first segment, man. We had tensions rise. We were happy. We had everything on this first segment. And thank you all so much for joining us.
Let's peel back the curtain here. Sometimes a little dramatic tension is part of the show.
Yes.
And I don't know if I've ever told you this, Zach, but this is something that on the radio side often comes up. When the light is on, take nothing personally.
Oh, of course. No, of course not.
Yeah. I hope you don't. But the light went on, and I think someone said I was triggered.
Yep.
Yes, you could say I was triggered by the name Mike Lombardi coming up, and I've been triggered for about 15 hours as a result of that.
Yes. Well, thank you all so much for rolling with us on the live side. We're about to jump into the pod side. And if you wouldn't mind hitting us with a thumbs up, subscribe, and turn on alerts on YouTube, we'd really appreciate it. And we really appreciate you rolling with us on YouTube. We'll jump into the pod side now.